in Britain has surged to 1.3 million in the first 3 months of 2020. It's the economic impact of the coronavirus. Today, Rolls-Royce has announced 9,000 job losses, mainly at its plant in Derby. As the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, warns there may not be any immediate economic bounce back once the worst of the virus is over. Joining me now is the Mail on Sunday's irrepressible columnist, Peter Hitchens. Peter, you've argued before the lockdown is too severe, the medicine too severe, the economy is getting worse by the day. You'll have heard today Rolls-Royce are axing 9,000 jobs, mainly in Derby. Have they got to lift the lockdown a lot sooner?
First of all, I object to the term lockdown, a horrible expression to describe the punishment of convicts in an American penitentiary. We're free people in a free country. We shouldn't allow this term to be used of us. Secondly, I thought from the beginning that the strangling of the economy and the imposition of house arrest were wholly disproportionate to the problem we faced. When I hear of thousands of people being made redundant, I try to think of each of these individuals. 1,000 is a statistic. An individual is a number of people who have worked for many years, who've obtained skills, who've supported their families, who've taken out mortgages, who've built lives, and who now find that everything on which this was based is being taken away from them. And it makes me both very angry and very distressed. And it particularly so because it was an avoidable action of a deliberate government policy which should never have been followed.
Do you think it was the mentality of the sheep? Other countries have done it, we must too, or because they genuinely believe this is the way to try to stop the spread of the virus, which, by the way, it appears they've not achieved in doing?
Well, I've no doubt they sincerely believed that what they were doing was right, but then incompetent and easily gullible people often do think that what they're doing is right. The problem is these people have got positions of immense responsibility, and on this occasion they had probably the greatest responsibility of their lives, and indeed the greatest responsibility anybody's probably exercised outside wartime in modern history, and they took, in my view, a gravely wrong decision. It seems odd that people should spend so much time and effort obtaining office, and then when they get it, be so incapable of exercising it in a responsible fashion. I think that when we have calmed down about this and understood that we engaged in an episode of a spasm of mass hysteria, and when we look back on this in 2 years' time from the ruins of our economy and the ruins of our liberty as well, that we will want very much to see some sort of, how shall I put it, some justice. Those who took this wrong decision should in some ways pay some sort of penalty for what they've done.
But how do they do that?
But at the moment, my main concern is to bring it to an end as quickly as possible. And
I get that.
To do that, I think that everybody involved in creating this nonsense should admit that they were mistaken. And the absurdities which are now being imposed, the ridiculous, actually scientifically baseless 2-yard gap we're supposed to maintain between each other, the wearing of muzzles in the street, the absurd provisions that would have to exist in schools if ever they could be opened, the nonsensical discouragement of people from using public transport. All these things are, and indeed the reluctance of many of the unions and the teachers to reopen the schools, are all the result of the government deliberately spreading fear. And that fear has taken root in a quite frightening way. And people who one thought were rational behave as if they're in the Middle Ages confronted with the Black Death. And there is a truly irrational fear loose in our country at the moment. And the only way in which this could be brought to an end would be if those who began it would admit that they made a terrible mistake. This is exactly the case of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, as rather beautifully summed up in the Disney film Fantasia. The apprentice thinks that he will save himself a lot of trouble if he casts a spell to get these automatons to carry water for him, but the problem is he doesn't have any way of stopping them. And this government, in the same way, has sought to achieve an end by creating a great deal of fear, and now has no way of dispelling the fear which it created.
They would argue, if they were in a studio with you, Peter Hitchens, they aren't talking about government ministers, and let's not forget Labour opposition MPs have argued that the government took us into I appreciate you don't like the word lockdown, closed down the economy too late. But they would argue they've been following the science.
Well, they could argue they've been following some science, but the thing about science is that any real science is about investigation and ultimately about disagreement. And there is, in epidemiology, as in many other areas of science, considerable disagreement, and there were other opinions which they could have listened to. They chose, it seems to me, without any serious consideration, to listen to one particular argument to follow it. I would love to be in a position to actually argue with these people in a television studio, but the fact is that the British Broadcasting Corporation has become the government broadcaster during this period, and has treated any kind of dissent from the basic message that we are threatened by the worst plague since the 1918 influenza pandemic. Any dissent from this is treated as illegitimate and is given no platform. So there is absolutely no opportunity for people such as me to do this. I would love to see, for instance, Lord Sumption, the former Supreme Court judge, who takes a very similar position to mine,
Yes, yeah.
in the same television studio as any of the ministers involved in this. And I don't have the slightest doubt that his logic and knowledge would cut them to ribbons in a matter of minutes. But they are not exposed. Because the only true forum for debate in the country in its current state would be broadcast. They're not exposed to this, so it doesn't happen. And you rightly point out the role of the Labour Party, which has not been in opposition. We have a plastic dummy parliament, which confronted with the shocking coronavirus bill back at the beginning, this voted for its extremely radical provisions without so much as a division. There was no opposition, and there's been an absence of opposition, except ludicrously from people like me. I don't see why it should have fallen to me, but there it is. Here I am. I'll continue to do it. And as I say, if you include in that opposition people such as Lord Sumption, you realise that it isn't just me. It's other people who also see the absurdity of what's going on. But when you see thousands of people having their livelihoods destroyed in a great industry, one of the very few major industries in which this country is still a world leader, these people being chucked out onto the stones after years and years of work in the middle of trying to support families and pay for their homes, I just find it so appalling.
Just finally, Peter Hitchens, you wrote very powerfully about this in your Mail on Sunday column. I don't know if it was last Sunday or the Sunday before. I imagine your post bag is always pretty big and bulging. Did you get more letters than normal?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I do get a reasonable amount, but people these days, in the days of Twitter and the blog that I run, people have learned to contact me in other ways.
Online.
Yeah, I mean, I do. Apart from the office is largely closed, and it's taken some time to catch up as well with the physical correspondence. So I do try to do it. No, I think that the online response has been more vigorous because it's, apart from anything else, that's apart from the Mail on Sunday, that's been the place where I've been most able to make my point. And also I have been having a regular, almost regular slot on Talk Radio each Monday morning with Mike Graham, where he's but with great generosity of spirit, because he disagrees with me, has had me on every week at 11 in the morning to try and discuss this in a rational fashion, and that's also got me quite a lot of response. But no, I think, in fact, because fear is such a powerful emotion, and because people are afraid, I think, in fact, I'm still speaking. I don't claim to be speaking for a majority. I'm still speaking for a growing minority of people who begin to realise that we have been grievously misled on this. But it's taking quite a while for that to sink in. And in fact, until the furloughing comes to an end and the money finally does run out, and until also the real damage done by this begins to find its way into the prosperous chattering classes, I think, which it will, because the damage to the economy is so profound. Until then, I think, when there will be a great awakening, until then, people like me will remain in a struggling minority.
Well, Peter, you're a very noisy minority and a very articulate minority, and we're very glad you joined us on The Daily Show today. Peter Hitchens, columnist of the Mail on Sunday. Don't miss it.